What's going on, guys? It's Meui here, and today we're going to finally be going over the Lepic build that I've been working on for a while now. Now, I know there's been a lot of videos of Lepic builds that have been coming out lately, and I did not go through and copy paste anybody's build. I did a lot of testing by myself to figure out what I really think is the best. I've actually spent about 25 million gold on all my mods and different testing. Some of the mods I'm using and some I'm not, but I think this build I came up with, you guys are really going to enjoy it a lot. A lot of the builds that are going around right now are very glass cannony. Basically make it so you shoot your ulti and then you kind of just are useless after that, and you have to either jump off the map and reset or just kind of stand there and stare while your team fights the boss. But I actually don't think that's a great idea for several reasons, and this build that I made actually does pretty much the exact same damage as those builds while still maintaining a very good level of tankiness. Not only that, but I future-proofed the build. And what I mean by that is there's possibilities of certain things changing in the game in the future. So as I was building this out, I was thinking about those things to make sure that this build would maintain itself regardless of possible changes that Nexon might make. So some of the things I was considering while building this was the possibility that Nexon removes the ability to reset your ultimate cooldown by jumping off the map. Another thing that I considered is a possibility that they make it so the weapon mods that you use specifically for attack speed get nerfed so that they no longer work with the ultimate. And then I also kept in mind a possibility of them just nerfing the damage altogether. So as I go through the build, I'm going to explain kind of how I went about doing that and how the build might change if certain changes happen. I'm also going to show you guys both sides of this build because, again, a lot of the Lepic builds that you're seeing have very cherry-picked clips. And the reality is that Lepic is RNG based to an extent. Now you can obviously minimize how much RNG there is by stacking up your damage. And I promise you guys, this build I made has an insane amount of damage. It's doing exactly the same damage as all the other ones you're seeing. But we now have more survivability, and I future-proof the build for you guys. Because the reality is, Nexon probably has their eyes on Lepic, and there might be nerf. And on a last note, of course, I made the bossing side of this build, but I also made a mobbing build for you guys. And the beautiful thing about this is, it uses every polarity slot in both builds. I planned this out intentionally for you guys, and I'm going to show you both. And the mobbing build is actually pretty ridiculous. So let's not waste any more time and get right into this build. So typically I start this with going over the Transcendent mod here, but the Transcendent mod in this case is actually not super important. Now, Firearm Master is exclusive to Ultimate Lepic, but I'm going to come back to it because, again, it's not super important for this build. It's going to give you a small damage boost, but you could still do this on normal Lepic. Now, I'm sure a lot of these mods look pretty familiar to you guys from other builds, but there are actually some differences. Pretty much all the Lepic builds are different combinations of these mods and then some other mods, but this is what I truly believe is the absolute best combination that you can possibly have right now. And I'm going to show you guys the strength of this build and also how tanky it is, because it's going to do the same damage as all those other builds, but you are going to have a lot of tankiness on top of that. And like I said, again, it's future proofed, and I'll show you guys exactly how. First, let's go through each of the mods that I have here. We're going to start with the base damage mods. So first, you're going to want Fire Specialist. Now you could also use Focus on Fire here if you want a little bit of CDR for your ultimate, but flat skill power is what is going to make this build extremely strong. So flat skill power is what is scaling with the initial hit from your ultimate ability, which basically has an initial hit and then it does continuous damage over time. But the initial hit scales a lot more from flat skill power, and this is because the multiplier is so ridiculously high. So even though it's only a 4% difference, I did choose to go with Fire Specialist because that 4% is actually a big chunk of damage. Now your other damage mod, you can flex this. You're going to see a lot of builds that use maximize power. This basically affects the continuous damage, but it does not make as much of a difference as you guys might think. And having this polarity here is very important to future-proofing the build and also to having a really strong mobbing setup, and I'll show you guys that. Now you might think that that 40% difference from Technician to maximize power is detrimental, but I promise you guys it's not. You do not need maximized power for this build to be extremely powerful and one-shot all the bosses. And you don't get the downside of having much longer cooldowns, which could come to play, again, going back to my point that Nexon could possibly nerf it so that you can't actually jump off the map and reset your ultimate cooldown. So having this polarity slot like this is going to help future-proof against that possibility. But just to give you guys the numbers, The difference here from Technician to Maximize Power is about 20% on your continuous damage, which makes up a much smaller chunk of damage than you might think. The brunt of the damage is going to be the initial hit from your ultimate, which are those big like 3 millions you're seeing. Now the continuous damage is important to an extent, but we can't afford to sacrifice a bit of that damage so that we can have a much safer build and a much more efficient build when it comes to our mobbing setup and possible changes in the future. That is why I go with Technician here. I promise you guys, Technician blows all the bosses up just the same. I have tested with both and there's no noticeable difference because it comes down to your RNG on your crits, to how fast the boss is going to die. But with Technician, you're still going to be able to just delete every boss, even with pretty bad RNG. Now next, I'm going to go into really quickly the crit mods. This stuff's pretty standard. I'm sure you guys have seen it. But you're going to want your 4 basic crit mods: Skill Insight, Skill Concentration, Front Lines, and Emergency Measures. Now the reason for this is because if we take a look at Lepic's skill crit hit rate, you can see you actually get it up to 46% with these mods, which is really, really good. So you're minimizing the RNG necessary to actually one-shot a boss, and you can see his skill hit crit damage multiplier is also crazy high. So no surprise that we take those 4 mods. Now for our last damage mod, we're going to take Dangerous Ambush. This is because pretty much the second part of it, but the first part is also really good for group play and some cases in solo play. But the second part basically means when you knock a boss down, you're doing 50% more skill power, which, like I said before, is what is scaling his ultimate to do insane amounts of damage. So this 50% is pretty ridiculous and will make you do a ton more damage. Somewhere around, I want to say like almost 30% per shot. So absolutely, you want Dangerous Ambush. There is no mod better than this for Lepic bossing currently. Now the last part of this build, and I'm going to explain why this stuff is important. Lepic's ultimate has 2 factors to it that keep it going, and that's the duration and your mana. Now the best way to do this is to make it so that your mana and duration run out at about exactly the same time, and this mod setup does exactly that. And for those of you curious who may have watched other Lepic builds and stuff and you hear shot count being thrown around, this setup will give you a consistent 13 shots in your ultimate, which is the golden number for killing bosses. So first we're going to go with Battle of Stamina. This is going to give you a big chunk of HP, and this is what I mean by getting some of that survivability back, so you're not a glass cannon who just becomes completely useless after your ultimate. You can actually be near the boss and do damage after your ultimate without worrying about getting completely one-shot. And then this mod also gives you 8.8% skill duration, and this is exactly how much we need to be able to get that 13th shot off. And it's going to match beautifully with our mana bar running out at the exact same time. And that's exactly what we want with this build. Now next I'm going to take Skill Extension. Obviously this just extends the ultimate. So this combined with the Battle of Stamina gives us the perfect length, which is going to be 11.6 seconds. This is exactly how much time you need to be able to get 13 shots off, and it's going to match up with our mana bar. And the last mod, besides the Transcendent mod, is going to be Enlightenment. This gives us the mana boost we need to make up for how much mana our ultimate is draining, so that it ends exactly with our duration. Now I'm going to come back to this Transcendent mod real quick, and I want you guys to know that this mod is not necessary to be able to blow bosses up, insane damage, get all those clips that you want. This mod, all it's doing for you is giving you a skill power modifier increase on your continuous damage and your burn damage from your ultimate. So the continuous damage and then the burn off of this. So the math works out to a pretty small percentage. I don't know the exact percentage, but it is not significant. It's obviously, you know, if you're really trying to min-max, you'll want to get this, but you do need Ultimate Lepic for it. But I promise you guys, you're going to have the same results with this build without Firearm Master. It's just a nice thing to have. Now, next we're going to look at the gear for the bossing setup. This is super important to making this build kind of consistently one-shot bosses. So it is very important that you get this stuff done. I will talk about my experience before and after acquiring these items, because I did testing before and I did testing after, so I can give you guys a little bit of insight on both. So first is going to be your Reactor. This is just the best one you can get. Crit damage and Colossus damage. Now the reason for this is because that 2,436 Colossus damage that you're seeing is being added to this number right here, our skill power, And essentially what that means is before all those calculations are being run on the base skill power, so, you know, the giant percentage on our ulti, as well as, you know, skill crit hit damage and such, this is your base number that is being scaled from. So adding 2,436 to that, you can imagine, is a massive damage boost. That is raising this by, I want to say, almost 15% from the base. And as that scales up, it's going to be much more than that. So it is imperative that you guys get Colossus damage on your reactor. Now, the second one is flexible. Crit damage, I do find, is the best. Now, you could have tech damage here. You could have fire damage. Crit rate isn't the worst. Those are all pretty viable options. But if you really want to min-max this, crit damage is going to be your best bet here. And for those of you watching this today, the 27th, or if you're watching this on the 28th, you have a little bit of time left to go farm these reactors pretty quickly. The way you can do that is going to the Valby Circle farm. These are dropping there, so go do that now if you need it. It's a good spot, and I'm going to show you why it's actually a really good time to farm one of these and get it for a weapon with impact rounds. And I'm going to show you guys that. So on your weapon, there's two mods that are super important to this build. That's going to be sharp precision shot and fire rate up. Now, the reason these are so important is because they actually scale with your ulti shooting speed. So sharp precision shot is actually scaling it, and it's going to make it ramp up and shoot faster and faster and faster. But check this out, because I don't know if a lot of people know this, but if you look at my sharp precision shot here, you can see that it ramps up every 0.4 seconds on my impact round type gun. But if we look at sharp precision shot for a general rounds type gun, it is every 0.5 seconds. So this may seem kind of insignificant, but we're talking about max stacks at 4 seconds as opposed to 5 seconds. So I would absolutely recommend getting one of these for your impact round gun as soon as possible. Go to the Valby farm, get it while you can. Because besides those two mods, your actual weapon that you're using with the ultimate has no effect on the damage. Now for your components, and I'm sure you guys have seen this already, you're going to want the Slayer set. But I can give you guys some information before and after obtaining the Slayer set. You can actually still use this build and find pretty good success without the Slayer set. Now, it's obviously much more RNG heavy, so I would say I was one-shotting bosses maybe 20 to 30% less of the time, and the Slayer set kind of put me over the 80 to 90% mark, whereas before it was kind of like a 50 to 60% to one shot. So it does make a huge difference, but it does not mean that you can't use the build, because you do have to farm this component set from Promaniac. But the reason this is so strong on Lepic is because it gives you that skill power. And like I said, skill power is what we're looking for to really ramp up the damage here. Skill power modifier is not going to be nearly as big of a deal. And then you can see it also increases the skill cost. And that's why we run the mana mod to make up for that 15%. So on my Slayer set, I am running MP recovery out of combat with max HP. This is what I would recommend, these two stats here. If you can roll them, definitely want to get MP recovery out of combat, because that's going to recover some of your MP before you start shooting the boss itself. Now, this component is super important. This is your most important one. You want to roll and try to get a max MP roll of at least like 130, ideally a little bit higher than that, just to be safe. And this is because our ultimate drains MP per second and we need a certain amount. So 130-ish to 140-ish is your gold spot. Anything higher than that is obviously great. And then you also want MP recovery in combat to help you maintain a little MP. That one's not going to make as much of a difference though as the max MP itself. Now for your backpack, you can get defense and you can also get mana recovery modifier. That's ideally what you want here, instead of what I have, which is defense and firearm proficiency, which is obviously the firearm proficiency is useless for bosses. You want the MP recovery modifier here, but you can do without it. So ideally, if you get a high defense roll like this, just put it on. It's going to help a lot with your tankiness. And then for your processor, really doesn't matter a whole lot. Obviously, a big shield roll is going to help you be a little bit stronger and survive a little bit longer. And then I just have toxin resist on there because that's what it came with. This one is not super important compared to the other three, but you know, if you can get a good shield roll, that's obviously great. And one last thing I want to point out is look at how tanky I actually am with this build. We have 6,431 health, which means we are not going to get one shot. We have a almost 1,300 shield and then 11,000 defense. So this is tankier than, like, if you guys have been watching my bunny videos, this is tankier than that. you will be able to eat a lot of hits from all the bosses in the game with this build, meaning after you use your ultimate, you can still pull out an actual strong weapon and do damage. And since your ultimate is the only reason that this reactor really matters, your strong weapon doesn't have to match up with your reactor. So in my case, I'm using the Thunder Cage. So after I ulti, you know, if the boss isn't dead, I can pull the Thunder Cage out and use that until my ultimate is back up, and it's not on a 2-minute cooldown because we're not using maximized power. Now I want to show you guys a couple important things before I get into the bossing and explaining that. Now the idea around this build is to pop your 2 or your C on PC, but your second ability, that's going to buff your ulti to apply burn. Now when you actually use your ultimate, what you want to do is immediately roll. And the reason you want to do that is because if you don't, you get this crazy long animation. Now the next important thing to keep in mind is that we are using sharp precision shot to help scale the attack speed of this, meaning we have to hold the ultimate down. You cannot tap fire it or it's going to shoot much slower. So when we actually use the ultimate, you have to hold it down, and you'll watch as it starts scaling up attack speed really fast. You can see that here. Now the last thing I want to show you guys is a possible misconception you have with how the ultimate is actually firing. So you do see those little orbs that are floating after you shoot it. That is not your initial projectile. So let me show you guys what I mean here. So if you see when I'm firing, there's a little projectile. When it actually hits something, it turns into that orb. So the projectile actually has a travel time on it, and you can learn to lead the shots and aim it exactly where you want it. Now this is obviously pretty hard to do, but again, you can see there's that initial projectile and then the orb hits, and you can see that there's a travel time on it. So a lot of people think that that orb right there is the projectile itself, but that is actually not where you aim at. It is just where it makes contact with the first target. So again, if you can get good at aiming that, you'll be a lot better and more consistent at hitting weak points on bosses. Now before I start the bossing section of this video, I want to let you guys in on a little secret that a lot of you may not be noticing in these Lepic guides that are being posted. You see people solo killing Frostwalker and Molten Fortress and Obstructor and all that, but they're actually doing something that they're not showing in the video, and that is they're queuing with 3 people that they know and having them disconnect before they load in. What this does is it scales those bosses down to a 1-player raid. So it's essentially like fighting any of the other single player bosses, which kind of makes me think why they don't have a solo version of these bosses in the first place, because they have the scaling for it. I just don't want you guys to see those videos and be like, oh, I can go into a group raid and just one-shot the Frostwalker for the group, because that is not what you're seeing. Anyways, let's get started on the bosses, and of course we have to start with our friend the Devourer. Bullying him is just the tradition now, and I will show you how you actually start with this build in each boss fight, and it's pretty much the same every single time. So I'm just gonna run up to the spawn here. You can pop your buff when you're getting pretty close. It lasts for a really long time. And I'm gonna pop my ult and roll and just go for weak points here. Obviously I am way too close, so I'm not hitting his weak points, but ideally you want to just be hitting his weak points. I'm using my mobbing build and almost killed him. Let's try that again. Alright, and take 2 on Devourer. I'm now using the correct build. And we got a little 7-second Devourer. Not bad. And fun fact there, guys, I actually still had the wrong mods on because I replaced my bossing setup with the replacement mods here, so we actually just killed him with the wrong mod. So take 3 on this one. Alright, third time's the charm, right guys? There we go. And I did have the right mods on this time. And boom, 6-second Devourer kill, so we saved an extra second there. Awesome. And real quick, here's an example of a Dead Bride kill. This one you could do a lot faster. I don't think my RNG was great here, but she is basically a one-shot every time. And now I'm going to show you guys an example of bad RNG and good RNG on a Promaniac kill. So this first one is going to be with pretty bad RNG. And then here is one with pretty good RNG, just to kind of show you the difference. Now it is only a 3-second difference, but 3 seconds when you're talking about one-shotting bosses is actually quite a lot. So you can see the difference here. And I'm going to show you guys what an initial burst phase on an actual group boss looks like. Because again, something to keep in mind is a lot of those videos you're seeing are them scaling it down to a one-person boss. But this is what it'll actually look like in a group setting. Now it's still a lot of freaking damage. And a lot of my shots got lost there, but again, you can see it's quite bursty, and I did mess up some of my shots, so you're still going to do a lot, but actually one-phasing it kind of as a solo Lepic is quite difficult. So again, just something to keep in mind when you're seeing some of those clips. And for those wondering, we did kill it. 58 billion damage, not too bad. Alright, and let's real quick go through the mobbing setup. As you can see, every single polarity slot is used. This setup is freaking awesome. It is so much fun to use. You just spam grenades everywhere and they blow everything up. It is really, really strong. So we're going with Focus on Fire instead of Fire Specialist for that extra cooldown, and I'll show you guys why. And we're going Focus on Tech instead of Technician, again for more cooldown here. And we replace that with MP conversion. And then we also have Nimble Hands, so we drop the mana mod. So these are all our cooldown mods here, and these are our 2 damage mods. Then we're going to take Skill Concentration and Skill Insight for more crit and more crit damage, and Emergency Measures for more crit rate and more crit damage. Now I did drop front lines for this to be able to incorporate more CDR, and it's not detrimental because this is a mobbing build and it does a lot of damage already, and it's super spammy, so you will kill everything without it, I promise. Then obviously we have increased HP for extra survivability, skill expansion to make our grenade radius a lot larger. And then this is kind of a flex spot. I like MP Collector because it just means I never have to worry about mana, along with the Transcendent mod, which I'll go over last. Now you could swap this out for something like Dangerous Ambush if you want, or something better for mobbing in general, but I like MP Collector. It makes it super spammy. Now our Transcendent mod is basically MP Collector in a Transcendent mod. Every time we use an ability, we get a chance to restore our mana 12% at a 17% chance. And it has an internal cooldown, in this case at 2.6 seconds, because we have so much CDR, the cooldown's really low. And if we actually look at the grenade here, it is a cooldown of 1.5 seconds. But that is not the actual cooldown, it's actually shorter than that. Let me show you what I mean here. Throw. Throw. And it actually feels like the cooldown is about a second long. So it's pretty insane. And you can see the damage is quite good on it. And for the reactor for this, I just use skill critical hit rate and skill critical hit damage. You really use whatever gives you lots of damage. You obviously don't need the Colossus damage anymore. So, and then for your components, you can pretty much use whatever you want here. I just am still using the Slayer set because I have infinite mana anyway, so it works out. But if you want to use something with more health or defense or whatever, do that on this. It's just a mobbing build, so it's not a huge deal. You'll have plenty of damage still. And I'll show you guys a real example of using it. So you just run around and throw nades everywhere. It is super fun and super easy to use and really strong. And that is it for this build, guys. Now, I didn't go through and kill each boss a million times and cherry pick clips of like 6-second kills. You can do that if you want. It again is just based on RNG, but I kind of wanted to show you guys what these builds really do and what is really going on behind the scenes with it. The build is super strong and will one-shot pretty much all the bosses in the game outside of the group bosses, unless you do the cheese that a lot of the videos you're watching are doing. But I really do think this is the absolute best way to set Lepic up, because it does give you the tankiness you need to continue fighting bosses. It gives you some future proofing with the ability to slot a lot of cooldown in the future if any nerfs were to happen, and it lets you have a really strong mobbing build and use all your polarity slots. My next build guide is going to be for Ultimate Valby. I've been thinking of a lot of different ways to build her, but I still need to see what her ultimate mods actually look like. I'm going to work on that and get that out to you guys as quickly as I possibly can. We're also working on finishing the Boss Bunny series, so I'm going to finish the last 3 bosses for that. I'm also working on some weapon builds, so I'm going to make some videos for that, specifically the Devotion and then the Enduring Legacy, both of which are getting buffed next patch for some reason. But yeah, I really hope you guys enjoyed this. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one. Now real quick, I want to explain what I meant previously when I was saying I future-proof this build for you guys. And again, this is based on possible nerfs to things like jumping off the map to reset your ulti, or if they nerf the attack speed on your weapon affecting the ulti itself. So pretty much in all these cases, to be able to viably use this build, you're going to have to bring down the cooldown on your ultimate by a lot. Well, luckily with this setup, we can actually do that, and let me show you guys how. So we're going to drop Technician here, and first replace that with Nimble Fingers. Next, we're going to replace Fire Specialist with Focus on Fire. And again, it is a 4% decrease, but assuming that, you know, some of these nerfs go through, the priority is going to be on cooldown so that you can use your ultimate as many times as possible in a fight while still doing good damage. Now, this provides us a 5-second cooldown on our ultimate. Now, the next thing we're going to replace is Enlightenment with MP conversion, and you may be thinking, but wait, that's gonna just completely nuke our MP pool. And you would be partially right, but again, we need to get a very fast ultimate cooldown so that we can actually use it beyond that initial use. In use cases where, you know, the boss doesn't die, or where you can't reset your ultimate by jumping off the map and you're gonna have several phases, whatever that may be, I'm just showing you guys how you could adjust this build to account for those changes. So because we pretty much nuked our mana pool, we can actually take skill extension off here. Now our ult's obviously going to be shorter, but we're going to be able to use it a lot, and I'll show you guys that. In its place, we're actually going to put Spirit and Shield, because that 8.1% skill power gives a lot of skill power. We're going to have a shorter ulti, but it's also going to be doing more damage now, and we're going to be tankier as well to be able to make it through longer boss fights. Now, if we save all that, you'll notice the duration has gone down about 3 seconds here, but stay with me, guys. This also means we don't need as much mana, and our cooldown is the big thing here. Our cooldown is 25 seconds. So we could actually start using this ultimate a lot more often. So again, hopefully we won't have to make these changes, but in the case that Nexon makes it so you can't just walk up and nuke every boss in 2 seconds, we can now adjust to that. And you may be wondering, okay, well, where's the attack mod? Again, the attack mod is basically scaling your burn damage, which is not nearly as important as any of the other mods that are in this setup now. Now, you could argue about dropping a crit mod for it, but I would not recommend it. I think this is the absolute best setup in the case that we have to drop our cooldown for whatever reason, because Nexon changes how things work. And again, if they nerf the attack speed on the ult or the damage on the ult, it probably means we're not going to be one-shotting bosses anymore, which means cooldown on the ultimate is going to be extremely important. So 25 seconds, not bad. And we can count the shots on this here. So we got 9 shots there. You could actually argue that MP Accelerant could be decent here. So with MP Accelerant, it was 11 shots, but we do have extra mana in the laboratory, so it would probably be closer to 10 shots there. But either way, you're getting 9 or 10 shots, and you're on a 25-second cooldown. So if anything was to get nerfed, this would be a safe bet.